bloom in barren ground. Some stories don't begin with love, they begin with expectations. Yoonmin was only 18 when he entered the Min household, too young to understand that marriage is a place like this. A act about love but about legacy. He was not chosen for who he was, but he was what his body was expected to give, a child. And here, a continuation of bloodline and the pride Min family hold. And Minungi, only 19, was no different in the age but words apart in understanding. He had been raised inside a structure where obedience comes before emotion, where silence was after than disgrace. When he married Jimin, it was a raised expectation, almost automatic. Love was not asked for. It was assumed it would follow later. But if it never arrived in the way it was supposed to, they did not know each other, not truly. There were no slow conversation, no understanding of boundaries, no learning of comfort, only a shared room, shared obligations, and a family watching closely for the results. In the beginning, Yoongi thought he was doing what was expected from him. He followed what he had been taught. What intimacy meant, what marriage meant, what duty meant. And Jimin endured because endurance was the only language he had been allowed to learn in that household. But even in the silence, damage grows in deep. Years passed inside the Min household like a slow suffocating grandness. The house itself was grand, but it never felt warm towards him. Grandmother or Yun ruled in that court, her voice soft in tone but sharp enough to cut through anyone who raised her will. Whenever called Jimin by his name, he was the boy, always distant, always lesser, always the reason things were not going as she planned. The pressure of children became the center of everything, and when nature did not comply, blame replaced the patience. One IVF became two, then three, then four, and then the fifth. Each one more painful than the last, each one less voluntary. Jimin's body became something monitored, corrected, forced into hope, and then punished for failures. Yoongi meanwhile began to disappear, not physically at first, but emotionally from the beginning. He worked longer hours, come home late. When he did return, it was never the peace. It was noise. His grandmother's disappointment, his mother's frustration, and a house that always demanded more than it gave him. And slowly that frustration turned toward Jimin. Not because Jimin deserved it, but because he was the only place where it could safely land. Words become sharper, silence become heavier, and what remained between them was not hatred, but exhaustion, disgust as distance. Still Jimin stayed, not because it was easy, but because he had nowhere else to go until the fifth IVF changed everything. That night was not dramatic in the way endings usually are. There were no final declaration, just quiet pain, a body that had endured too much, a marriage that had stopped speaking softly long ago, and a man lying in the dark, realizing that love if it ever existed in the way he thought it did, no longer protected him, not anymore, not ever. And when he left, no one stopped him because they pushed him away. From the hairs to the grounds by slapping or hitting him harshly on the face. The distance followed. Jimin cried. He even ran for Yoongi, but the ignorance feel like something Jimin never realized. The distance, that he never exists here. He was just here for a hair, and if he can't give this thing to the Min family, if he don't, he have to leave. And that's how he leave. Year followed, and in those years something unexpected happened. Life did not end, it just changed. And a miracle pushed Jimin into a rebuild. Jimin rebuilt himself in a small town, far away from the silence that controlled him. It was not easy. There were nights where memory hurt more than reality, nights where sleep was impossible because the past refuses to stay buried. But then come Mr. Lee and his wife, two elderly strangers who saw something in him and world had tried to erase. They gave him shelter, not the charity but a space. And in that space, Jimin learned something he had forgotten. He was still a person, still a human being who can breathe and who have the chance to live again. They pushed him out of their house, their grand mansion, because Jimin was not pregnant. But a miracle get him two angels. Not a mistake, not a failure, not a vessel, a person. And then comes Minji and June, two lives that did not ask to be born into the pain, but arrived anyway, softly, loudly, undeniably. They become his entire world, his reason to breathe properly again, his reason to stand when everything else in him wanted to collapse. But even healing was shadows, because questions come, children ask questions, and truth, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually rise. When Minji asked about their Appa, Jimin did not lie. He could not. The answer was simple, brutal and honest in a way children should never have to hear. They was not wanted. And that single sentence reshaped everything. Minji began to believe that love meant fixing absence. If Appa returned, Yuma would stop crying. June in construct decided absence meant danger, so he stopped asking although. And Jimin unknowingly let them build their own understanding of abundance until the day everything collided again. A children's NGO's picnic of the primary school, a simple outreach program, a harmless decision. Except it was not harmless, because fate does not always announce itself. You give us there. It was his charity. Older now, controlled, composed, a man shaped by time and regret, speaking on the stage without knowing that his life was sitting in the crowd, watching him without recognition, because he never existed in their life. But children notice things adults fail to see. A laugh, a face, a familiar expression in the stranger, and something in Yoongi broke quite that day. Not fully, not loudly, but enough to disrupt the life he had built on avoidance. But when he saw the school form later, names of the children with no father listed, something inside him finally cracked open. Because absence, when documented, became unbearable. And so he returned, not as a man speaking control, but as a man chasing what he had lost. What followed was a reunion. It was a collision. Pain, memory, anger, grief all surfaced at once. Words that had been buried finally spilled out. not neatly, not correctly, but honestly. Jimin spoke of abundance, of surgeries, of silence, of being after behind while still being expected to remain available. Yoongi spoke of presence, of ignorance, of being too young to understand what responsibility meant. When every adult around him treated obedience as love, neither of them was fully right, neither of them was fully wrong, but both of them had been changed by the system that never taught them how to protect each other in this thick. And in the breaking point, something shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. And for the first time, the distance between them was no longer denial, it was truth. After that, nothing returned to how it was before. Yoongi chose something unexpected. He left. He left the family made him. The family made Yoongi. Not Jimin, not the children. He left the family that shaped him, the main household, the expectation, the control. He walked away from it all. Not in anger, but in clarity, because for the first time he understood that loyalty without love is just repetition of harm. And he did not want to repeat it anymore. He rebuilt a different life, simpler, quicker, away from inheritance and pressure, away from voice that told who to be. And slowly something else began to happen. He learned how to be a father without condition. Minji and June did not know him as heir or successor or the name. They know him as a pa who played with them, who laughed with calculating outcomes, who stayed, and Jimin watched all of it from a distance that slowly became less painful, not because the past disappeared, but because the present was no longer repeating it. There was still fractures between them, still hesitation, still memory, but then there was also something else, presence. One evening, after watching the children laugh freely, Yoongi asked softly why Jimin still stood at the edge instead of joining them, and Jimin, holding years of survival in his voice, answered honestly, because he never expected this. He never expected to find him again. Yoongi, in return, only smiled, small, real, tired in a way healing make people tired, and said something simple. He never expected to get his angel back either. And in a moment, there was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic ending, only a quiet understanding that some love stories are not about how they begin, but about how they survive what should have ended them. And this one survived, not perfectly, not easily, but finally, truthfully. Because he only chose the family he made, the responsibility he should have, the person he should choose. So, the marriage began in the barren ground, finally bloom with two beautiful flowers. The end.